It's 3 in the morning. In a palace chamber deep within the Forbidden City, a 13-year-old girl is being dressed by 4 eunuchs. She hasn't eaten in 12 hours. Her hands are shaking. In 2 hours, she'll be led through a labyrinth of courtyards to the emperor's bedchamber. She may never leave. This is the reality of imperial concubinage in China's Ming and Qing dynasties. We're told stories of beauty, luxury, silk robes, and jade jewelry. But what was life really like for the thousands of women locked inside the world's most forbidden palace? The answer is far more disturbing than you might imagine. For nearly 5 centuries, from 1420 to 1912, the Forbidden City was home to emperors, their families, and an army of concubines. Some estimates suggest over 9,000 women lived and died within these walls, most never seeing the outside world again. What did they do all day? How did they survive? And what happened when they didn't? This is their story. To understand the lives of imperial concubines, we need to understand the system that created them. The Forbidden City was built during the Ming dynasty, completed in 1420 under Emperor. It covered 180 acres, 980 buildings, 9,999 rooms, because only heaven could have. This wasn't just a palace. It was a self-contained city, designed with one purpose: to serve the emperor. And the emperor's most important duty wasn't governing. It was producing heirs. The imperial harem system wasn't about romance. It was a carefully designed breeding program, wrapped in ritual and hierarchy. The structure was rigid. At the top, the Empress, chosen for political alliance, not love. Below her, the imperial noble consort. Then noble consorts, concubines, and noble ladies. The lowest rank, attendants, young girls, sometimes as young as 13, selected from the annual draft. Every 3 years, officials would tour the provinces, selecting girls from Manchu families. Beauty mattered, but so did health, lineage, and childbearing potential. The girls had no choice. Refusal meant death for their entire family. Once selected, these girls would enter the Forbidden City through the gate of divine might. They would bow 3 times, touch their foreheads to the ground 9 times the Couto, and from that moment, they belonged to the emperor. They would never leave. But what happened next? Most people imagine luxury. Silk beds, servants, endless feasts. The reality was very, very different. Let's walk through a typical day. It's 1730. The Qianlong Emperor rules. You're a low-ranking concubine, assigned to the Palace of Eternal Spring. You wake at dawn around 5 a.m., not because you want to, because a eunuch enters your chamber, claps twice, and announces the time. You have 30 minutes to prepare. Getting dressed isn't simple. Your hair must be styled according to your rank. Wrong ornament. Punishment. Your robes must be specific colors. Cello. Forbidden, unless granted by the Empress. Your fingernails, grown long as status symbols, must be protected by gold nail guards by 6 a.m. You're required to pay respects to the Empress Dowager. You kneel on cold stone floors, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer if she's in a mood. After this, you return to your quarters. And here's where the reality hits. You have nothing to do. The Forbidden City had rules for everything. Concubines couldn't leave their designated courtyards without permission. They couldn't write letters. They couldn't see their families. Reading was restricted. Most books were forbidden. Entertainment was monitored. So what did concubines do all day? They embroidered for hours, days, years. Embroidery served two purposes. First, it was seen as virtuous proof of patience and feminine skill. Second, it kept hands busy and minds from wandering toward dangerous thoughts, like escape, like rebellion, like the world beyond the walls. But embroidery alone couldn't fill the emptiness. So concubines developed elaborate social hierarchies among themselves. Alliances formed, factions emerged, and rivalries turned deadly. Because here's the brutal truth. In the Forbidden City, there was only one way to escape obscurity. Get pregnant. An emperor might have hundreds of concubines, but he'd only sleep with a fraction of them. The selection process was dehumanizing. Each night, the emperor would be presented with tablets, small jade or ivory pieces, each inscribed with a concubine's name. He'd flip one over. That woman would be summoned. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The chosen concubine wasn't allowed to walk to the emperor's chamber. She was stripped naked, wrapped in a silk sheet, and carried by a eunuch. Why? To prevent her from smuggling in weapons or poison, she'd be placed at the foot of the bed. The emperor would decide if he wanted to proceed. If yes, the encounter was timed by eunuchs waiting outside. They'd cough, periodically a reminder not to take too long. When finished, the eunuch would enter, document the encounter in official records, and carry the concubine back to her quarters. If she conceived, her rank would rise. If not, she might never be summoned again. Imagine that existence. You're 15 years old. You've been in the palace for 2 years. You've embroidered 10,000 flowers. You've seen the emperor once from across a courtyard. You have 60 more years to live. This is when women got desperate. The Forbidden City's history is soaked in poison. Concubines poisoned rivals. Mothers poisoned other women's children. Eunuchs, who had their own complex power structures, could be bribed to deliver toxic substances hidden in food, cosmetics, or tea. The most common: mercury compounds, arsenic mixed with rouge and powdered lead, applied to a rival's makeup, slipped into their soup, dusted onto their pillows. Death was rarely immediate. It was slow, wasting, easy to disguise as illness. The palace physicians were often complicit, paid to misdiagnose, to look the other way. Records from the Qing dynasty show that in some years, dozens of young concubines died from sudden illness. Most were low. Most had recently earned imperial favor. Most were between 15 and 25 years old. No investigations. No justice. Just bodies wrapped in white silk, carried out through the gate of the dead, and buried in unmarked graves outside the city walls. But physical death wasn't the only threat. Madness was common. The isolation, the monotony, the loss of agency, it broke minds. Palace records mention concubines who stopped speaking, who tore out their own hair, who stared at walls for days. The palace physicians had a term for it: palace disease. Symptoms included melancholy, loss of appetite, violent outbursts, and what they called seeing ghosts, hallucinations brought on by extreme psychological stress treatment. Herbal sedatives, opium derivatives, isolation in darker, smaller chambers. Often, these women simply vanished from records, forgotten, but not every concubine accepted this fate. Some fought back, and a few won. The most famous example is Cixi. She entered the Forbidden City in 1851 as a low-ranking concubine to the Shunfeng Emperor. She was 16. She had no powerful family, no connections. What she had was ruthlessness. Cixi quickly understood the game. She cultivated relationships with eunuchs, using gifts and favors to build a spy network. She befriended the emperor's mother. And most importantly, she got pregnant in 1856. She gave birth to a son, the emperor's only male heir. Overnight, her status transformed. She became imperial noble consort. But she wanted more. When the emperor died in 1861, Cixi's 5-year-old son became emperor. And Cixi, along with the Empress Dowager, became regent. But sharing power wasn't in Cixi's nature. Within months, she orchestrated a coup. Rivals were arrested, exiled, or forced to commit suicide. The co-regent mysteriously died officially from illness. Unofficially, poison, for nearly 50 years, from 1861 to 1908. Cixi ruled China from behind a silk screen. She controlled 3 emperors, her son, her nephew, and her grandnephew. She survived assassination attempts, palace conspiracies, and foreign invasions. But even Cixi couldn't stop what was coming. By the early 1900s, the Qing dynasty was collapsing. Foreign powers controlled Chinese ports. Rebellions erupted. Modernization movements challenged ancient traditions, and inside the Forbidden City, the old ways were dying. In 1912, the last emperor Pui, a 6-year-old boy, abdicated. The dynasty ended. The Forbidden City's gates opened, and thousands of concubines, eunuchs and servants walked out into a world they didn't recognize. Imagine that transition. You've spent 40 years in isolation. You're 55 years old. You've never used money, never chosen your own clothes, never made a decision about your own life. Where do you go? What do you do? Most had no families left, no skills beyond embroidery and court etiquette. Some became servants in wealthy households. Others begged. Some were taken in by temples. A few survived long enough to be interviewed in the 1950s and 60s. Their testimonies are haunting. They describe the Forbidden City not as a palace, but as a prison, beautiful, ornate, suffocating. Today, the Forbidden City is a museum. 8 million people visit each year. They walk through the same courtyards. They photograph the same golden roofs. They marvel at the luxury, but they're not seeing what was really there. Behind every ornate door was a woman who couldn't leave. Behind every silk screen was someone who hadn't chosen to be there. Behind every piece of jade jewelry was a life, measured in embroidery stitches and imperial favor.